Hello, everybody. Back from lunch, everybody tired? So I would kindly ask you to interrupt me as soon as I'm speeding too much. Perfect. Thank you. To interrupt me if I'm speeding too much or I'm getting ahead of myself. What I want to tell you today is our implementation of CRUD scripts in FileMaker, why we care about them and why you might do as well. That's the fundamental question. Why do I care? I care because I'm lazy. I hate waste. Wasting time, effort, whatever. My brain's on stuff that I have already thought about once, but have forgotten twice. And in the end, I hate to have thought about something somewhere and not being able to find it. So I really prefer reusable code in whatever way possible. But FileMaker is easy. We don't need many lines of code to do something right, do we? How hard can, for example, a search be? If you need to teach a new recruit in your company how to properly search for something, it's go to layout, it's enter find mode, it's set field name, it's perform find. That's how FileMaker does it in many sample scripts. But as we all know, it's not. And there is a bit more code that you can add to make it a bit more resilient or user-friendly. And you might need to search in a new window. And if you have a new window, you need to deal with window positions, zoom levels, window sizes, etc. And in the end, if you find something, if you find one record, you might want to display it in a detail view. If you find a couple of records, you want to display them in a list view, maybe. And of course, if you find multiple records, on what records do you want to be active on in the end? So if you implement all those lines in every search you do in every script, already now your script will explode. And I hate that. I hate long scripts because I lose sight of the important stuff. And you're welcome. And I wanted to get rid of that. So other people normally have had the same problems. And there is a bigger world out there for inspirational purposes. And I was working a lot with RESTful calls over the years and found that those ideas of get, post, put, update, delete, whatever implementation there is out there seemed interesting and sensible. And somehow my clicking is not working anymore, but I can do it here. So what they really mimic are those 4 basic functions. And those 4 basic functions are defined in persistent storage for create, read, update, and delete. And wouldn't it be really nice if we had the perfect create script, the perfect read script that we just have to call whenever we want to read something or delete something or create something. And in a way, we are all in persistent storage business, so why not use those? So what did we make of it? We created a couple of, we call them API scripts. It's an internal API, basically, to do a function. And we structured them in this way. We have one script that's called create edit, because creating and editing for me always was more or less the same process. Because if I want to write the record and it's already there, I'm editing. And if it's not there, I'm creating. Those differences in usage we put into parameters, so it's easier for us to decide or correct an error. The second one is find and present, because finding is not everything. You find a record or a couple of records in a table, but then you need to present them to the user or not. Sometimes you just need to find a record and work with it and forget about it later. But in a few instances, you want to show this specific set of your find to the user. We have a read script, which is most of the times called when two different databases or two different files are talking to each other, where we can tell the target of my read what information of a record I want to have returned. So in the old days, we had, for example, when you're choosing a contact in an invoice, we got 38 parameters back, no matter if we needed them or not. And if you reuse that, then that script always gave you back 38 parameters if you needed them or not. And with that read API script, we can now decide which parameters I want back for this specific solution. And then, of course, there is the delete. And deleting, in some cases, is just deleting. In some cases, it's archiving before deleting. In some cases, it's deleting records with their child records or not. So all those structural differences need to go somewhere. And I don't want my colleagues to have to think about them every time, again and again. What made all this easier for us to do, because on the outset, it really did look a bit tricky, was one custom function, that's JSON to var, which takes a JSON and converts that JSON to variables. So the nodes of the JSON are the variable names and the values are the values. That is not helpful. Was that me? Thank you. Perfect. Did I step on a cable or something? And this custom function also gives us a JSON var names variable as an output, where we have an alphabetical list of those variable names. So what this enables us to do is to loop through the variables and use them in set fields by name. And if your node names, as in our case, are named after the field names that they should be set into, it's fairly easy to make a decent loop out of it. The other thing that really helped was naming conventions. And if we have about 50, 60 programmers here, we probably have about 80 naming conventions in the room, and none is correct. There is no right way. There are a couple of wrong ways, and I'm pretty sure every one of us can think of 3 different ways of how not to do it, but those are our choices. Every base table in our solutions has one occurrence without any relations. Those tables are important to us because if we create or edit a record, we do it in those table occurrences, so less data is being pulled when we enter them. Those tables are named table name underscore OB. That's just from the German without connections. It's just helpful to us. But it's good to have a naming scheme that differentiates those. And all the layouts that correspond to these are called all. Historic reasons, it could be X, Y, Z, it really does not matter. It's just good to have one string in the front and the back somewhere that defines those, so you can calculate from the table the layout name that you need to go to. Oops, that was one step too quick. And wait. So now we can calculate the layout name that we want to enter for changing data if we know on what table we want to work on. And of course, especially when you're working with other programmers on the same solution, it's easy to get confused, so we prefer fields to be named in a way that represents what's in there, first of all. And second, one field that holds a specific information that should hold the specific information in another table, the same specific information, those fields should be named the same. Otherwise, you get totally lost, especially when you're trying to normalize those interactions of tables. So for us, this means that we have a naming convention for the index field of a record, and this naming convention says it's NR for number table name, and wherever I use this index, it's either a primary key or a foreign key if it corresponds to the table name or not. But the field always stays the same. But again, this is a can-do and not a must-do. How can you use this? The task was, as I said in the beginning, to create scripts that are universal and not depending on the specific table names, structures, layout names, whatever. So one single script can be deployed in every solution that you use and just needs to be parameterized. The create edit API is the first one that I'll show you. If we have time in the end or at the coffee break, I can give you a look at the actual script. I have it here with me, but just here for making it a bit quicker because we are a bit time limited. I'll talk you through the parameters that we use. We have decided to structure this parameter in 4 parts, so it's 4 lines. The first line gives us the table where we want to interact with the data. You could expand that and write a file name / table name there if you want to use the information in another solution. That works as well. But for the sake of the argument, it's this way. Then we have either keine, German for none, or a JSON object. And this JSON would then be used for searching. So either you give it none because you know you want to create a new record, or you give it some indication of what record you would search for, and if it's not there, it's being created by the script. Then the third parameter is the data that I really want to use to write into that record. This again is a JSON with field name, field value, and all the fuss. And in the end, the last line, which is optional, I have one string that tells me what return values I want to get in a JSON format. And here I have invoice OB. You recognize that's a base table. I want the number invoice, so the index field from that base table in a node, in a JSON node named number invoice. Because sometimes those fields or the feedback of the scripts is being inputted then into the original data set, and I need to make sure that I have control over the field names here. Questions so far? It's awkwardly quiet. Okay. The find and present API has just one big JSON where we can search for number DS. That's basically the standardized name for let's search in an index field, whatever the name is. That's optional. You don't need to do that, but it's the quickest way. You have the table here in a fully qualified naming convention. The target window, that could be the main target, the main window, or any other window that you have on. We have a target layout. We have a numbering scheme for our layouts. That's where I want to present the result of my find afterwards. I have search options here, so I can tell the script I want to end in a search. Then I don't need to do a search prior to that, or I want to constrain an already found set or expand on it. That all works quite nicely. If I have a card window or a pop-up or whatever, I can define the positions here and the height. I can define the number DS of the landing record. So if I'm starting on one record, or I know which record I want to be active on after my find, I can give the ID here. The window mode that I want to end in. Follow-up scripts is very important for us because that gives us the ability to use that in bigger script calls. For example, when you are updating a contact on an invoice, you need to search for one contact first. And if you find it and the following script condition, get found count equals 1, evaluates as true, then I know I have found my record, and I can then use the follow-up script of read. For example, read that record with the following parameters, so I get a feedback. Or from there on, I could just call a create edit API with my record that I'm sitting on right now, where I want to update my contact and give it the parameters that will be evaluated if that script condition on the found record is true. The delete API was a bit scary because normally I want to keep things that can ruin everything to the customer. But I think we secured it quite nicely. First of all, we can only search for an index field here. Because if I want to delete something, I need to know prior to that which record I want to delete. There is not a search beforehand. I need to be very sure what I do. I give it a table, of course. I can tell it if I want it verbose or not. So if the FileMaker dialog, do you really want to delete, pops up or not. I can give it an archive flag, so I know that the record is only being deleted if it's prior to that written as a JSON object into my archive file or not, if it's just deleted blindly. Then I have the option of deleting parent records with it. So for example, if you look for all the invoice line items, do you just want to delete the line items, or do you want to delete the parent record with it? And then what is very important for us was that we give it an expected found count, because before I do something, I need to know what I'm doing, and if my expected found count is not identical to the found count that I get, I will not do anything. So if I want to delete 5 line items and I find 6, then somebody's working on it. So I abort. But if I find 4, that's okay, because there's a process running, and if it's just 4, I expected 5. Something has changed in the meantime. And then, of course, we have the number archive that it should be written to. And that is what we do. And those parameters, once you've put them in Watson or text expander or whatever, are really easy to reuse over and over again. You only need to change the variables in your script, and all those 50 lines that make a really good record creation or record editing with error correction and whatnot possible, they collapse to 2 lines: set variable, execute script. Do we still have time, or do we want to discuss?
How do you do the navigation to the landing record in your search?
The navigation to the landing record is done by, first of all, I have a custom function that lists me all the index numbers in the order that they are sorted on right now. Then it loops through them in a while and counts until it hits the right index number. So then I know I have to be in my found set of whatever, 20 records. The expected ID is in line 7, and then I just go to the 7th record. Yes?
Why didn't you make one JSON object in the create edit?
Why we didn't make one JSON object in the create edit? Very good question. We could have done it structured, and that would have certainly been nicer retrospectively, but it's a child of its time. We came from 38 parameters, 38 separate lines, and we got rid of all but 4. Yes?
When you are presenting, how do you handle sorts? If you want to present things in a certain sort order, which tends to be typically the case, if you find more than one record.
How do I handle sorts when I present records? Yes, normally with a postscript, or in most of the cases, those sorts are not so important, or they are already created by the go-to-related record. Because if the source is sorted or the relation is sorted, then it's all fine. Yes?
How do you handle errors? Like, do you return to the following script all the time?
Error handling in create edit is done by writing tasks for the server. So if I cannot touch one of the many records that are being necessary to be changed, that script, that create edit script, will write we call them cron job. They are just a script task line in a separate table that the server is continuously pulling for if there is anything to do. And there, of course, I only need that one record with the same parameter that I just wanted to use. So I have an abort and self call as a PSOS, which I normally try to do 3 minutes later. And 3 minutes later, if it still fails, it will still queue itself for another 3 minutes later. So that's a perpetual call until it writes out. You want to see the script, or are we done? Okay. That's the original script header, but of course the rest is English. Don't be worried. I have the tendency of putting the parameter to call a script in the header of the script, so everybody can just copy and paste it from there, just to be, again, very lazy. First of all, we need to dissect the parameter. We write a script log, that's audit logging, where we not only give the audit log the name of the script, but also the parameters, so we know what we wanted to change in the audit log, and then we will see what we changed in the audit log. We always do create edits in a new window, no matter what. We go to the corresponding layout, the OB layout. We rewrite the table name. The user doesn't have to remember those. If the parameter type is JSON, we had a prior version to that where the parameter type could also be XML, pseudo XML to be exact, but we've operated that out. Nobody's using that anymore. Then we make sure that we are on that new window, on that specific record. This also means that all those operations do not disturb the user interface, and whatever record I'm on, I can create a new one or edit a new one somewhere else. In all those cases where it says individual record handling or error handling, that means that a centralized script in my toolbox is being called, and either we as developers are being notified of an error or the user is notified. It really depends on what the error is. But for example, if a layout isn't there, thousands of records, blah, blah, blah. Else, we are dissecting the JSON that is in there with our custom function, and then we are setting the fields from the variables. That's just a loop, so those set field by names are just evaluated here. Is that too quick, or is it okay? Good. Then, of course, now we have either found a record or we haven't. And if we haven't, in both cases of not finding one or having keine in the beginning, we create one. So now we certainly are on one record to edit. If found count is bigger than one, then something went wrong. Now we check if the record is locked. That would also result in trying a self-call and doing that later on as described. We clear the variable names. We redissect now the third parameter, the data parameter, and write it out. Yes?
If you scroll back up a tiny bit, you set a global variable to fail, named fail,
Yes, for reporting afterwards.
for reporting afterwards?
Yes.
So that's kind of separate from how you're passing the result back?
Yes. We can deal with multi-line variables. So if a variable has an underscore ML there, that means that this, sorry, there's a question, yes?
Well, it's a general question, and you can take it afterwards if you like. I'm using kind of the same scheme, and my biggest challenge is that if I ever want to go back and change something in this script, and I used it, 1,000 places, I have a huge challenge. So I ended up only adding, but then some adding is kind of like a compensation of something that went out, and then you have a version 1 and version 2. You see the issue? Yeah. You have some thoughts about it?
Yes. The question was if that script needs changing or expanding over time, or in separate modules, in separate files, having separate versions. That's tricky. That's totally correct. We have one standardized version that we are updating and improving, and we are using that one for new files. But over time, this script gets edited in a separate file to specific needs of that file. Because sometimes you cannot do X, Y, Z that is needed in all the other modules. Yes, it does change a bit, but the API call does not. So you can improve the script over time, but take care not to ruin the JSON call in the beginning. So we can deal with multi-line variables, for example, using them in cases of repeating fields. Some developers still use them, or there are very few instances where they are really sensible to use, but we can also set those fields. There are the repeating fields. We have normally in the read section, we have transformed those nicely with the hash plus and hash minus to be able to dissect it here. We can also set container fields with it, either from base64 encoding or from a path. So if the active variable in the loop has a file path in there, we are loading the record from the file path in the container. If it's a base64 encoding, we would recognize that from the variable's name and then decode the base64 and put it in there. Only usable for very small files. Don't be fooled. You quite quickly get to the limits of your cache, of FileMaker, variable lengths, etc. And then, of course, we have the normal case of writing out a variable in a field. Then we're calculating the return parameter. We get either a status OK if $Rückgabe, the return value is empty, because we haven't asked for anything. We just want to know if it went well, or we give it back again with a custom function that converts that pipe string into a JSON, and then we clean up. And that's 318 lines. I don't have to write out every time I do a create or an edit somewhere. Of course, this is not dogmatic. So if you just need to set one field somewhere, I wouldn't suggest using that script everywhere. But as soon as you are changing layouts, looking for a record, it's really helpful. And the principle of having everything in here parameterized and calculatable for us was freeing and reducing code lines so much that I wanted to share it with you. Thank you.